so if we look back at this, this is what we call a karyotype, which is looking at your chromosomes. So a chromosome spread. In this case, we're looking at normal human karyotypes, okay? And if we look at these guys look like spaghetti or do they look like sausages? Sausages. So if you were going to take a gander at where they are in the cell cycle, where would you guess? Yeah, prophase, someplace in mitosis. As it turns out, it's easiest to pull the chromosomes and get a good picture of them right about metaphase. Right? So a metaphase spread is usually what they do for a karyotype. Okay, so just, you don't need to know that. This is a fun fact. Okay. And then in this case, these are colorized, right, so that you can see the different chromosomes. If they're doing a stain, the chromosome 1 has a particular pattern of staining if you use a specific kind of dye. If you're using fluorescent probes, like they can actually label specific genes, right? So if you throw this dye onto a whole bunch of jumbled up chromosomes, spread them out as best you can identify what the 2 number 1s, the 2 number 2s, 2 number 3s. And then they're photographing them and then photoshopping them together. So they're not actually like taking molecular tweezers and moving chromosomes next to each other to spread them out like this and take a picture, right? They're doing that on the computer, okay? They used to actually take a photograph and then cut the pieces of the picture and glue it. That's real cutting and pasting. Yeah, that was like too many years ago, okay? And so you can see that the banding patterns, the color patterns are identical on the pairs, right? And would we say, does it tell you now, is this a boy or is this a girl? This is a boy. How do we know? Look at that guy. He's so cute right there. Right. If it were female, there'd be 2 X's. Right? Boys have an X and a Y. But we see there, oh my God, I can't see. 2 number 22s, 2 21s, right? All these guys. 2 of each. 2 sets of chromosomes. 2 number 1s, 2 number 2s, 2 number 3s, all the way through an X and a Y. The genes on chromosome 1, on this one, are the exact same genes on that chromosome 1. The gene for earlobe shape. How your earlobe is shaped. I don't know which chromosome it's on. I'm making it up. I'm pretending it's on chromosome 1. It's a big guy. It's got thousands of genes. It could be on that one. Okay? You have 2 copies of every single gene. Unless you're a boy, and then you guys are missing the second copy of the X gene. Okay? You're a little low on your DNA. Sorry. Okay. That's another thing that everybody nods, yes, I get it, and I talk about it, and I talk about it, and then I ask it on an exam question a little bit differently than the way I talked about it in class, and we don't know the answer to that, right? And that's just common. That's just how we are raised. That's just the media. That's just what people think. We talk about the gene for whatever, not the genes, right? You have the, gene for whatever, and your hair color gene. We're never talking about them as pairs, as lay people. We only start talking about each trait and each protein in your body. Actually, there's 2 copies of each gene here, and so that throws people. But there has to be, because you have 2 number 1s, and number 1 has the exact same genes on it as the other number 1 you're carrying. Right? Earlobe shape, whether you have a straight forehead, hitchhiker's thumb, tongue rolling. What kind of collagen, all the different things, part of one of the eye color genes, one of the hair color genes, right? The exact same gene. 2 copies of every single one, because chromosome 1 of chromosome 1, who'd you get from? Mom in the egg. The other chromosome 1 then you had to get from dad in the sperm. So you've got the gene for earlobe shape from dad and the gene from earlobe shape from mom. what you look like, your phenotype, depends on how those two genes interact. Okay? And then we call them alleles, that stupid word allele that just makes people's underwear get all in a twist. Okay? So I'm just going to bring it up now because it's going to come back to haunt us in the genetics portion, and the more we talk about it, the more comfortable we get, right? Your alleles do not have to be exactly the same. It's the same gene, the gene for earlobe shape. Mom gave you the allele that's all flappy, right, the big fat guy laying down here. Maybe Dad's gene for earlobe shape is his earlobes are tight against his jaw, right? They don't curve in and make this big fat blubbery thing. They're just nice and fancy tight. Okay? How those two then interact determine whether you have floppy or tight. But it's the same gene for earlobe shape. It determines when you're in utero what happens. Right? It can, which is bizarre. There's a gene that controls that. Like, really, who would care? But apparently, sometime in evolution, right, it must have been sexually selected for or something, because everybody's either got flappy or straight and a little bit of in between. So as it turns out, the big flappy blubbery guy is dominant. So if you had one of each, you're going to look flappy. The only time you have the tight against your jaw is if you got the tight allele attached from mom and dad. And then your genes would be exactly the same, earlobe shape. Your alleles are the same, attached, non-blubbery. Okay? So every single gene, we have two copies of. One came from mom, one came from dad. You might not see the phenotype from, like, my nose is exactly like my mother's. It has nothing to do with my dad. I still have nose-shaped gene from dad. It just lost, right? Lost out during development, did nothing. My nose is the exact same shape as my mother's, which is the exact same as my grandmother's. And it's not good, but that's the way it goes. Okay? My daughter left out. She did not get my nose. But that doesn't mean I don't have the gene for nose shape from my dad. It's just the allele lost out. The mom allele was dominant. I got the mom nose. E-slope just... Okay. And so because we have two sets, or two copies of every chromosome, two copies of every gene, therefore, we call ourselves diploid. Ploid is your sets of chromosomes. So ploid just means set. Or your ploidy is how many sets do you have. So our ploidy would be 2. Di, right, meaning 2. Ploid, meaning set. Diploid is also known as 2N. N as the ploid part. Set. 2 sets. The N stands for the set. Okay. If there are some plants out there that get all crazy and they have more than 2 sets of chromosomes, animals can't tolerate more than 2 sets of chromosomes, right? That just doesn't work. But plants can. So if they have 4 sets of chromosomes, then they'd have, that's probably not going to show up, another, and each one of these is really replicated with its centromere. They'd have 4 of each. And then we'd call that 4N, or tetraploid. Octoploid would be 8. Strawberries are octoploid. Okay, so that's your ploidy. So we're going to be talking about mostly diploid stuff because that's what vertebrates and most animals that we think about are. And plants, lots of plants are diploid. There's just some that can tolerate having more chromosomes. Most of them are the agricultural ones that we've selected for having more sets of chromosomes because it results in big, juicy fruits. Right? The wild strawberry is like this teeny little tasteless red thing, but like go to, get the strawberries from the farmer's market and there's these big, that's because they have 8 sets of chromosomes. Pumping out the goodness. Okay. So this is just the same stuff that I said, right? The N, again, meaning the sets, And so if you only have one set, you are N. And they call that haploid. It should be uniploid. That would have been much easier, but some ding-dong, or monoploid, right? But so some a-hole named it haploid just to mess with us way back when. And it stuck. I like uniploid better. Much easier for students. Okay. So there are organisms out there that exist as haploid organisms, just not the normal animals. Weird, some insects, some weirdo single-celled protist type things can exist as haploid. What are there any cells that we have that are haploid? Yes, the sex cells, our gametes are haploid. That's the whole point, right? We go 2N to N. And then when you put two N's together, woohoo, you go back to 2N. Right? That's our whole point. So we have to make our gametes haploid in order for when fusion of them happens, we go back to diploid.